possible to improve your mind, to learn something you never thought you'd be able to grasp, kind of figure it out, to crack the code on what was previously unsolvable. I'm just trying to memorize it and get it into my brain. I'm gonna learn something that a 4th grader should know. Or are we stuck being us? The very definition of self-improvement is a moral act, because it engages in a struggle to improve the self. The fantasy, of course, is that you can get something without working for it.
I know Kung Fu.
As if that would be the same thing. In this video, I'm going to force myself to learn 3 things I kinda dislike, in the hope of becoming a better person. But let's back up a second. What brought this on? I sometimes imagine this thought experiment. I call it the sea turtle, because sea turtles live a really long time. Picture yourself living 200, 500, 1,000 years. Would you become a polymath, fluent in multiple languages, a master of countless skills? You know, the way we often picture like imaginary people who live a really, really long time. Or would you be more or less the way you are now, just older and more out of touch? See, my fear is that I wouldn't automatically become this enlightened person just because I've lived a really long time. I think people are what they are. And sure, some people would learn those new skills because they're on track to do that already. But most people would just be old for a really long time. Just like Mark Twain said, most men die at 27. We just bury them at 72. So, here's the question. Is my current self the kind of person who would grow over 200 years? And if not, can I change that? The more I think about changing our circumstances, the more I realize external changes don't really change you. Take winning the lottery, for example. That could have a negative impact. But real self-improvement, that's different. Something happens to us in the process that cannot be replicated by anything external. Something should just click, right? There's a reason why directing our energy inward, facing struggle, transforms us on a deeper individual level. When I look at myself, I see that there are a lot of things I have actually blocked myself from learning or doing just because I always figured they were either beyond me or they just aren't my thing. But what if that is my brain lying to me? Do I think that this 200-year-old version of me would know those skills? Would 200-year-old me be the kind of person who would struggle through things to come out on the other side? If yes, maybe I should start now. I mean, it doesn't have to be important, it can be stupid things, just things that I find kind of intriguing and interesting. But I guess the thing is, shifting your brain takes effort. It is a lot easier to not do anything. But also maybe a struggle is key here. I mean, maybe that is like a big part of it. So, today I'm starting an experiment. 3 skills I've dismissed. Can I drag them into my world and master them? I realize this should not be hard. Can I become a little bit more like the person who wouldn't just grow old? Let's find out. The dismissed skills. Rubik's Cube. Actively refuse to learn this. Too tricky, I said, but does it really live in the impossible zone? Or is that just fear talking? Poetry. Never connected with it. But what if I give it a real shot? Study 1 poem, break it down, memorize it, maybe crack the code somehow. Long division. Was never taught this in school. Too late now, I thought. But why let a 10-year-old's math trauma decide what my adult brain can't handle? So, why these 3? Each targets a different part of the brain. Rubik's Cube, hand-eye coordination meets puzzle logic, poetry, language muscles, and creative interpretation. Long division, raw analytical crunching. So, this is what I want to focus on over the next couple of days. But now, let's go. I have to pick something up. So I just picked this up, Rubik's Cube. Now, I do not know how to solve this, but my question is, can I figure it out in, let's say, 48 hours? It is so pristine right now. Okay, let's just do it. I'm not sure how long it's going to take. I gave myself 48 hours because it's good with a little structure, but I don't know, is that a reasonable amount of time? Might not be. I'm under no delusions. I think this is very hard to do. Yeah. So I was thinking, the way I should go about this is, first of all, watch a bunch of videos.
So I always wanted.
And let's get solving.
Here's how to solve for that.
And absorb the knowledge of others who know what they're doing. It sounds very doable, doesn't it? Now, from what I've gathered, there are only like 8 steps to solve the cube, and depending on your method, you may do a variation of this or exactly like this. Now, I'm not concerning myself with the later steps whatsoever at this point. I'm working on step 1 and 2. So I've been spending a little time just familiarizing myself with the cube. Each side has a color that doesn't change, and that's determined by the center. So we have green, and ideally this whole side wants to be green. We have white, this whole wants to be white. The white side is always opposite from the yellow. Can solving a Rubik's Cube be considered a moral struggle? Is it real self-improvement? Well, I think so, because no one can just give me the skill. I have to figure it out on my own. And struggle, I mean, that's just another word for putting in the effort. Without effort, there's no real self-improvement. Sure, things can improve your situation, your circumstances, but that's not the same as you improving. Just being in a better place doesn't say anything about how you got there. It only counts as self-improvement if you did the work to get there. I will spend, I don't know, an hour, a little over an hour watching videos and kind of just playing, and I feel pretty good about things. Okay, I figured out how to do the daisy and the white cross. Not easy to do the daisy, I think. Kind of tricky. Oh, okay, we got it. The daisy I'm not a huge fan of. The white cross I think is really cool because there's a method to get to the white cross from the daisy, and I love that. So now daisy, we're going to match this side to its home. So we just turn this around. I'm going to do a 180-degree turn. Okay, now we're going to switch out the 5 minutes. Our white cross. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. If you start learning about the cube, you're going to come across this right-hand and left-handed movement pretty soon, because it's imperative to learn it in order to move forward. And this is where this hand-eye coordination and the connection between physical movement and problem solving comes into play. How long does it take to learn this series of movements? At this point, I've been practicing it on and off for maybe, I don't know, a little over an hour. It's sticking okay, we're still making mistakes. And it's one thing to figure out the movement and a completely different thing to implement it in the correct way. You've seen some of these kids who like, they're so fast with it. Yeah. Honestly, I think I kind of need a break. I think I need to just stop this for a little bit because I just like have too much in my brain. To say it is pretty cool when certain steps kind of click in your brain when you first watch the videos and everything is just coming at you. It is too much, and then you go through something and then you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and then you get a little overconfident and you think, oh, I know how to solve this, and then you make a mistake and you're like back to square one. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do here is to solve the corners. We want white corners here, and this I think is very fascinating. But I'm starting to realize, like, one thing, that up to this point I've gone through a process, like steps, in order to achieve a goal. And that's pretty easy. I mean, that's just memorizing the steps. Do a daisy. You want to match, you want white corners here. It doesn't really require you to understand like how each movement really behaves. You just have to remember that at this point you need to do these movements. And here I've stumbled upon this concept of the intuitive method versus following the steps. Before I started this, I thought solving the cube was just one thing, but now it's becoming apparent to me that just because you're learning the motions doesn't mean at all that you'll understand intuitively how the cube works. At least not yet. In fact, here's some interesting information. No matter how scrambled the cube is, it can always be solved in 20 moves or fewer, if you're using the optimal algorithm, that is. Also, the average solving distance for a randomly scrambled cube is about 18 moves. I also learned some common algorithms. If you're using the beginner method, a cube takes about 100 moves to solve. There are other methods as well. But yeah, I think I've got ways to go. Let's just focus on getting to 100 moves, shall we? That seems a bit, no, that's not right. And look at the snow. This is all wrong.
Now we can solve.
This is fun though, I have to say. It's much more fun once you understand a bit more, or kind of like, you kind of, oh yeah, I kind of see where that's going. Daisy check, white cross check, white corners check, now middle row. Middle row, still the trickiest at this point.
So I'm taking a walk in the snow, figure out clear my head a little bit and get ready for the next step. I think it's good for the brain to see something different and completely switch off.
The next thing is to solve for the middle row. That was not correct. I think that's one of the things that is so frustrating. Just a little misstep and then you are like, what do I do now? Do I have to go back from the beginning, or what do I do? It's not obvious. It's not straightforward in that sense.
And then do the algorithm depending on which side it needs to go to.
It gets a little bit confusing. My strategy so far though is I'm trying to not rush to the next step until I've really nailed the first ones. Okay, so I'm getting to like the end part now, figuring this out, and I feel like it's a lot more complicated at this point. It's getting kind of late. I've been doing this for a while and I'm starting to mess up on basic things. Maybe what I really need is just go to sleep soon. I hope that everything that I've learned today has somehow got stuck in my brain, and I'll be able to pick it up back tomorrow. We have a new day today, and yeah, I've not completely solved this. I was thinking yesterday that I might be able to do this in 24 hours, which would have been right now, but I am still struggling a little bit with the very last step with the corners. Get some of this down. I wasn't writing things down for the longest time because I was just kind of to put it in my brain, but then I'm getting confused between the different steps and the different types of algorithms for each step. So now it's like, okay, instead of trying to go back to videos, I'm just writing it down in my book instead, so that I can reference things a little bit easier. I do like a challenge though, because if I didn't have this as a challenge, I would probably be like, you know, I'll come back to this in a little while. Whereas now I'm like, I have one more day to solve this, like for real. I'm finding the concept of self-improvement quite fascinating. I mean, self-directed learning is probably the most important way we grow, even though a lot of what we learn early on comes from the outside. Our parents, our environment, even just the basic struggle to exist. As kids, we don't choose to learn, it just happens because life throws so much at us. But at some point that changes. We reach a stage where learning becomes a choice, where we either take on the challenge of improving ourselves or take the easier path of avoiding it. And to be clear, avoiding struggle, avoiding the immoral isn't necessarily bad. It's not wrong to receive help or to help others. But that's different from the kind of struggle that transforms us from the inside out. At this point, we need to do the yellow cross. Okay, there we go. One thing I think is kind of funny when you're doing this is that even though you think you like remember all of the steps, you're thrown back to basics all the time because there is like one little thing that gets messed up, and then you're like, I have to start from the beginning. It is kind of good though in many ways that you have to go back to basics over and over again, because it forces you to go through the steps. In other words, you're very good at the beginning parts, or very good. You're much better at the beginning parts than the later on parts. So I'm just going through the whole thing again to match up the centers. Oh, I messed something up now. Just get this in my head. I'm just gonna like do it over and over and over again, these last couple things. I think that's what I need. Blue, orange, red, blue. So now we have okay, I have a solved cube, but is it really solved unless you can do it without any notes, without any paper, without looking at a screen? I feel like it's cheating, you know? I mean, I did it, but did I really get it? So now we have our very last step here, which is to solve the whole yellow, which is kind of exciting. Okay, cool, we got the yellow, and now we just have this one last step. And we completed the cube. It only took a very long time, but we did it. I just solved it again with very minimally looking at my notes. Okay, during the last couple of hours, I've been doing this over and over again. Initially, I was getting them like 50-50 right, so half the time I managed to screw up, and half the time I did okay. And now, last 3 times, I did good. Perfect every time. So I think I'm on a good streak now. Good morning. It is 48 hours later, and the question is, do I know how to solve the cube? Ready, set, go. I feel like I did that wrong. Ready, set, go. I did something wrong. I get stressed out, okay, because I'm timing myself and I make mistakes, so I'm just gonna do it a bit more relaxed this time. But I don't care if it takes me 10 minutes, okay? Bam! Okay, done. What did it take me? Oh, about 7 minutes. Okay, let's see if we can do a better job. Start. Okay. Done. 5 minutes and 42 seconds. That is an improvement. Not by much. I guess by a minute or... I don't think almost 6 minutes is anything to brag about. However, I'm mostly happy I got through it. There were several times when I was like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to get this. I'm not gonna be able to figure it out. But I did it. I did figure out how to do it. Do I feel like my mind has expanded during these 48 hours? Hard to say. I mean, I do feel good. But let's go over that stuff later. Now, let's move on to our next part of the brain.
We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race.
Now, that was a line from Dead Poets Society, and it is kind of an enticing thought, right? This idea that poetry is something that makes us distinctly human, that connects us, that it isn't trivial, although it is one thing to like the idea of poetry, and another thing altogether to actually like it. Okay, oh, you just caught me reading poetry. So this is the next step in our journey here. And I guess the thing is, I don't really like poetry. There, I said it. I don't really like poetry. And really, who does? I did some digging, and according to the National Endowment for Fine Arts, 9.2% of adults, representing 22.4 million people, read poetry in the last year, according to the 2022 survey data. Wow, really? I mean, that is a much higher number than I anticipated. The National Endowment for Fine Arts also concluded that in 2022, 48.5% of US adults read at least one book in the last year. And that is down from 52.7% 5 years earlier. I'm sorry, but to me, even like 48.5% seems like an inflated number. Most people I come across don't like to read at all. Although I guess the one thing to keep in mind is that that number refers to all sorts of book consumption, whether that is digital, audiobooks, physical books, etc. So I guess it's not that weird after all. I have poetry books in my home. I really like the idea of poetry, and every time we go to the library sale, I like to pick a few up. Yet every time when I try to read them, I struggle with it. I get stuck. It's not exactly candy. It's more like kale, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I happen to really like kale, but you get my point. I guess the question you have to ask yourself is what value does poetry even have? In A Defense of Poetry from 1821, Percy Shelley wrote, "Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world." He argued that poetry shapes culture, morality, and political thought even when unnoticed. And when I hear that, I think, okay, well, yeah, that might have been the case in 1821, but today? Shelley also wrote, "Poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were not familiar." Now, here we move more into like ephemeral territory, and this idea that poetry transforms perception, revealing deeper meanings in like everyday life. And that is something that I find rather intriguing. What am I really trying to do here? If the path to self-improvement is struggle, and so far I tend to take the easy route, put a poem aside when it gets difficult, well, then in order to have a transformative experience, I'll have to do the opposite, right? Push through. I guess I'm curious to see if I will be able to get something out of it. Can I decode poetry somehow? So to start with here, I have a book by William Butler Yeats. He's an Irish poet. I wanted something relatively short, something still kind of complex and interesting with different layers. So I'm not sure how to approach this. I think we should just jump right into it. It's called A Coat. I made my song a coat, covered with embroideries, out of old mythologies, from heel to throat, but the fools caught it, wore it in the world's eyes as though they brought it. Song, let them take it, for there's more enterprise in walking naked. As I'm reading this, I'm like thinking, oh, I do like this. This does sound interesting. But what does it mean? Very nice. Okay, so considering things usually tend to stick better in my brain after I've written them down, I figured we'll start with that. Okay. Got it written. To be honest, I feel a little bit lost here. The Rubik's Cube, very straightforward. You figured out the order of things. A poem is not like that. According to ChatGPT, I should read the poem multiple times without overanalyzing. I made my song a coat, world size as though they'd brought it, and walking naked. I do think that's kind of funny, like mythologies. World size as though they'd brought it. I am kind of thinking that I really like the idea that you, over time, do this with a bunch of poems, and you build like a little library in your brain of a few things that you just have in there to kind of grasp. I made my song a coat. Fools caught it. And I feel like I'm doing like a poetry recital here, you know? When I was a teenager, I remember setting a goal that I would read one book a week. I didn't really care too much what book it was, as long as I fulfilled my quota. And many times I read through, something rather quickly, getting very little out of it, but at least, I got my check mark. When you think about poetry, that's almost like the exact opposite of that, right? Having a numbers goal in mind means absolutely nothing if you don't understand what you're reading. And in order to appreciate poetry, you have to completely shift your brain. What's important here is not getting through a book. It is about getting through one poem, like one concept, and having it somehow affect you or giving you a different perspective on things. Okay, question. How does this make me feel? It feels like somebody's trying to take back control of their life in some way. A coat, covering ourselves, protecting ourselves. Fools, what's the fools? Is the fools like the enemy? Song, let them take it. For there's more enterprise, kind of like a reversal now, like we're realizing something. I guess the thing is about this stuff, like when you're reading it and you're not getting it, you just feel kind of stupid, Why am I not getting this? At least the cube is an order to things. Poetry is a whole different thing. Is it though? Is it a whole different thing? It's all about cracking the code of figuring out how to do it, right? How to grasp something. Make my song a coat covered with embroideries. Take it, for there's more enterprise. Obviously, it's not obvious. Out of old mythologies. Because when I think of mythologies, I think stories, religion. Like he created some sort of protection for himself from history, from religion, from stories. But the fools caught it, but it backfired somehow. Word in the world's eyes, as though they brought it. So it's like they took it and acted as if they had created this, as if they had thought of it as outside world song. But he says you can have it, for there's more enterprise in walking naked. Starship Enterprise, no. Enterprise, somebody's mission, somebody's life. There's more opportunities maybe in walking naked. Like I am better off not having this protection. Wow, I actually feel like I'm decoding this a little bit. Now, let's utilize the night to cement things in the mind and let things mull over. Have you noticed that too? Just how useful it can be to leave some space between focusing on things? And the next day, instead of jumping right back into Yeats, let's go in a different direction. My final part of this very serious experiment. Long division. Long division is no longer taught in schools, as far as I know. I wasn't taught long divisions, my parents were. And I remember when I was taught what they called short division, the idea or the sense was like, oh, you no longer need to be burdened to learn this complicated thing. You can now learn this shorter, more efficient method. Can we pause there for a second? When I think back to my education, that seems to be like a recurring theme, making education less difficult and more fun. I remember hearing people tell me all the time, like, oh, you're so lucky. Like when I was young, we didn't even get to talk in language class. We just did verbs all day. We're so much more evolved today. And when it came to math, it was like, wow, people have come up with better ways to teach math. You do not have to struggle to learn long division anymore. And whenever short division failed, there was always calculators, right? Still, I do come across long division every now and then. And I always think it looks kind of interesting, and I'm always slightly annoyed that I do not know how to perform this method. Can you teach me long division? Is that cheating? I feel like every time I use ChatGPT, I'm cheating. Of course, long division is a step-by-step method for dividing large numbers. Let's break it down with an example.
So now we're going to set it up to 4.
So as I'm going through the process of learning long division, I wanted to touch on the idea of moral struggle. There are many that associate the concept of morality with something negative, as in the misuse of judgment and consideration with regards to others. We might say a moral act, and others here applying judgment, when truly what you mean is that there are levels to behavior. Some behavior clearly are beneficial, such as going to school to learn something.
Okay, let's just go from the beginning here.
And others, such as drinking too much and wasting one's life in the bar, is less beneficial. On a narrow scale, what one does may not have a positive or negative effect on others, but on a wide scale, whether many people act moral or not does matter. Self-improvement is always moral, because it is only through struggle that we can self-improve. Those were the thoughts of the day here.
Oh, okay, so this is our actual answer here. 246 is our answer.
Where do I put the 3? Okay, I think I got the basic gist of it. Again, I'm still a little bit confused. I'm gonna watch some videos, I think, and kind of get it in my brain a little bit better and do a bunch of exercises.
The next digit, the 3, and put it right beside.
As I'm doing this, I'm just thinking, you know, obviously this is not brain science. This is relatively straightforward, not a big deal. Why is it taking me this long to try, you know, to do this? I have now practiced the long division a couple of times. I think I got the hang of it. I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to create me a whole bunch of problems so I can just like do. Okay. Okay, I did a bunch of practice ones. I stopped when we were getting to larger numbers where I actually need a calculator in order to calculate. I think the method is pretty stuck in my head now. It did not take long, which I guess I should have expected. I have been working on this for like an hour now, maybe. Kind of fun. If you never learned how to do long division, I would highly recommend taking an hour or so and just doing some practice things, because this is kind of a cool thing to know. It is an interesting technique, interesting procedure. Now, if you're over a certain age, chances are you know this already and you're like, whoa, that is easy stuff. I made my song a coat covered with embroideries out of old mythologies.
I have been thinking about this poem quite a bit, and I think it is definitely starting to click with me in some ways. And I guess the one thing I kind of realized, I made my song a coat.
I spent a few minutes here unpacking everything I realized about the poem. But at its core, I see it as a story of breaking free from stifling perspectives and societal expectations that once felt like protection. The poet realizes that true freedom requires shedding their old worldview and seeing the world with fresh eyes. I think it is a rebellion against the past and a declaration of personal independence. Of course, you might see it differently. It struck me like one of the things that I've kind of thought about as I've been working on this poem is how I have read poetry in the past and how I think that has been like a big mistake. Well, basically in the past I have picked up a book of poetry like any other book, and I have read it, started from page 1 and I read it through, never actually getting through a book of poetry, of course, but I read the first poem, maybe I read it 2 times, maybe 3 times, because I've always heard you're not supposed to rush poetry, right? But then I moved on to the next one. But I think what this has really taught me doing this, that those poems, nothing sticks in your head that way, at least not in my head. And I think the biggest thing that I have learned doing this is just this idea of just focusing on this one thing over and over and over again until it kind of just gets into your skin and like under your skin in a way. Like I feel like right now I have this kind of personal connection to this poem. I've lived with it for what, 3 days, and this is the 3rd day now. I made my song a coat covered with embroideries, and now it just kind of clicks with me in a different way than it did before. Like I realize what he's trying to say in a way. Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but there is something to it. So 1 week, that's about how long I've been spending now going from one thing to another in this self-improvement experiment of moral struggle. Did I succeed in this? Well, I guess it depends on how you look at it. I mean, obviously I can check these boxes in terms of Rubik's Cube. Yes. Poetry, yes. Long division, yes. Then there are, degrees within each of these categories. But in terms of mindset, where am I at right now? Okay, I feel clear-headed. I feel focused. I feel energized. So that's all good. I'm kind of looking forward to another challenge. I've come to realize when it comes to self-improvement, the goal is not to do something really big once in a while. The goal is to constantly just push yourself a little bit further, to not be lazy, like to go through a little bit of extra struggle every time you see something that you're a little bit intrigued by, and not just dismiss it for another day. I think if you do that, then all of those small improvements will just add up over time. That's a lot more powerful than just once in a blue moon try to do something different. I think if you can sustain that kind of behavior and that kind of outlook, that's what would create a very productive and accomplished 200-year-old person. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on the subject of self-improvement, moral struggle, like pushing through. I think this is an interesting topic on a personal level, but also on a much larger scale in terms of society. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.